thousands of unbelievable scenes playing out in Palm Beach, all detailed in thousands of pages of court documents unsealed just today. It all ties back to part-time Palm Beacher and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and the British socialite accused of being his madam.
We do want to warn you, some of this information is not suitable for children.
What if I told you the biggest danger in America right now isn't just what powerful people are hiding? My name is Olivia Hale, but what the internet is willing to invent. Because over the last few days, you've probably seen the headlines. You've probably seen the viral clips. You've probably seen the posts spreading like wildfire across social media. Trump blocks Epstein testimony. Victims name him directly in court. DOJ cover-up confirmed. And I need you to stop for a second. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Because this is one of those moments where the truth matters more than outrage. This is one of those moments where misinformation spreads faster than facts, and where the consequences of getting it wrong are massive. Not just politically, not just legally, but morally. Because the Epstein story is real.
Age from Mar-a-Lago, and entrapped in a world that I didn't understand, and I've been fighting that very world to this day, and I won't stop fighting. I will never be silenced until these people are brought to justice.
Jeffrey Epstein's accuser, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, speaking outside a federal courtroom in Manhattan.
The abuse was real. The trafficking was real. The survivors are real. And the people who protected Epstein for years were real.
There is a Trump DOJ cover-up. It is illegal. It violates the federal law. The president himself was forced to sign. That is the big thrust of this story.
So if we actually care about accountability, if we actually care about justice, then we have to do something that's harder than sharing the most explosive headline. We have to separate what is verified from what is viral fiction. And today, that's exactly what we're doing. Because the question isn't just what's happening with the Epstein files. The question is, are we serious about the truth, or are we just addicted to the drama? So let's talk about what's actually happening. Let's start with the basic reality. Yes, new Epstein-related documents have been unsealed. Yes, more names are being discussed again. Yes, survivors and lawmakers are demanding transparency. And yes, the public has every right to want the full truth. But here's what is not true. There is no confirmed court testimony where an Epstein victim directly accuses Donald Trump of sexual assault under oath. That story has been spreading. It's viral. It sounds like the bombshell people have been waiting for, but it is not supported by the actual record. And this is where we need to slow down, because if you want real accountability, you cannot build it on exaggeration. If you want justice, you cannot rely on misinformation. And if you want to expose powerful people, you cannot hand them an easy escape by getting the facts wrong. So what do we actually know? What is real? Donald Trump's name does appear in Epstein-related documents. That is true. He is mentioned. He is listed as an associate in certain contexts. And nobody disputes that Trump knew Epstein. Trump himself has acknowledged it. There are old interviews, there are photographs, there are social connections. That part is not speculation. But here is the critical difference. Being named in documents is not the same as being accused of committing crimes. That distinction is everything. Because Epstein's network was wide, it included politicians, billionaires, celebrities, royals, executives. And the terrifying reality is, many powerful people orbited Epstein long before the public understood what he was. So when names appear in these files, it raises questions, serious questions. But questions are not convictions. A name is not evidence of guilt. And the reason that distinction matters is because the internet refuses to respect it. For example, one of the most cited depositions in this entire conversation comes from an Epstein survivor named Johanna Schoberg. She was deposed under oath. She was asked directly whether she ever gave Donald Trump a massage. Her answer was simple: no. She denied any physical interaction. That is one of the clearest documented moments where Trump is mentioned in a legal context by a survivor. And what does the survivor say? Nothing happened. So how does that become a viral headline? Victim names Trump in court. Technically, she did. But the content clears him. And that is exactly how misinformation works. It takes a real fact, strips away the context, and leaves the public to assume the worst. Not because it's true, but because it's clickable. And that creates a massive problem. Because every time someone shares a sensational story that isn't confirmed, they weaken the case for actual transparency. They give Trump's defenders ammunition. They allow the response to become, "This is all fake news." They bury legitimate concerns under a mountain of exaggeration, and that is tragic, because the legitimate concerns are serious enough. The real Epstein scandal does not need fictional courtroom drama to be horrifying. The real questions we should be asking are these. What did powerful people know? Who enabled Epstein? Why did he get protected for so long? Why are documents still being fought over? Why is transparency still incomplete? Those are the real issues, and they matter deeply. So let's talk about what the real controversy is right now. The real controversy is not that Trump is silencing victims in court. The real controversy is that there is an ongoing battle over what Epstein-related documents get released. There is frustration over redactions, over delays, over secrecy. Survivors want accountability. Advocates want disclosure. Lawmakers want answers. And the Trump administration has taken steps that critics argue limit transparency. For example, reports have surfaced that internal reviews were stopped. Statements were made suggesting no client list exists. Certain materials remain sealed or unreleased. And that is why people are angry. Because the Epstein case represents one of the most grotesque examples of elite protection in modern history, and the public does not trust powerful institutions to tell the full truth voluntarily. That distrust is earned. Epstein abused girls for years, and people with power looked away. So when the government hesitates, when the files trickle out slowly, when the disclosures feel incomplete, the suspicion grows. And it should. But suspicion must still be grounded in fact, not fantasy. Because here is the danger. When misinformation spreads, it doesn't just confuse people. It protects the guilty. It allows anyone involved to hide behind the chaos. It turns serious accountability into political noise. And that is exactly what the system wants. So when you see viral claims like Trump blocks Epstein testimony, you need to ask, what does that actually mean? Because in reality, what's happening is legal process, court procedures, disputes over documents, protective orders, redactions, not some dramatic moment where a survivor is being physically silenced in court. That scene is viral fiction. The real fight is quieter but more important. Will the full network be exposed? Will survivors get justice? Will powerful people be held accountable? And will the government release what it has? That is the story. And that story is big enough. Now, this is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable, because accountability must be universal. It cannot be partisan. If Democrats are involved, expose them. If Republicans are involved, expose them. If billionaires are involved, expose them. If royalty is involved, expose them. Survivors don't care about party. Trafficking doesn't care about ideology. Justice cannot be selective. And that is why this issue is so volatile, because everyone wants Epstein to be a weapon instead of a reckoning. But the truth is, the Epstein case is not about scoring political points. It is about whether the powerful ever face the same consequences as everyone else. So here's what we know so far. Trump knew Epstein. Trump's name appears in documents. Survivors have not accused him under oath of assault in the unsealed testimony. The real controversy is about transparency and document release. Survivors and lawmakers want more disclosure. The public is furious about secrecy. And misinformation is spreading faster than verified facts. That's where we are. So now that we've clarified the most important thing, that there is no verified courtroom testimony accusing Donald Trump of assault in the unsealed record, we have to ask the next question. If that viral story isn't true, then why does this Epstein issue still feel so explosive? Why are survivors still demanding answers? Why are lawmakers still pressuring the government? And why does the public still feel like something is being buried? The answer is simple. Because even without the invented drama, the real situation is still deeply disturbing. And the real controversy is not about a courtroom scene that never happened. The real controversy is about documents, transparency, government secrecy, and whether the system is once again protecting the powerful. Because here is what's actually happening. The Epstein case is not closed in the public's mind, not even close. Yes, Epstein is dead. Yes, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted. But the core question that remains unanswered is the one people have asked for years. Who else was involved? Who else benefited? Who else participated? Who else knew? And why hasn't the full network been exposed? That is the fire underneath this story. And that is why every new document release instantly becomes global news. Because what Epstein represented was bigger than one man. Epstein represented an entire ecosystem. A system where money, power, and access created immunity. And survivors have said repeatedly, Epstein did not operate alone. So when new files are released, people aren't looking for gossip. They are looking for accountability. But here's the problem. What has been released so far is incomplete. And that incompleteness is where the anger comes from. Because while thousands of pages have been made public, many are heavily redacted, many contain names without context, many are already known, and many of the most sensitive materials remain sealed or disputed. So what does that create? It creates suspicion, it creates frustration, it creates the feeling that the public is being fed crumbs, while the full truth stays locked away. And that's exactly why survivors are speaking out. They are not asking for spectacle. They are asking for justice. They are asking for full disclosure. And they are asking for the government to stop acting like transparency is optional. This is where lawmakers entered the picture. In recent months, pressure has grown in Congress for the release of more Epstein-related records, not just from Democrats, some Republicans too. Because Epstein is one of the rare issues that breaks through the usual partisan reflex. Everyone understands how disgusting this was. Everyone understands how elite protection works. And everyone understands that if the rich and powerful are still being shielded, then the rule of law becomes meaningless. That's why the demand has grown louder. Release what you have. Let the public see it. Let survivors know the truth. And this is where the Trump administration becomes part of the story. Because critics argue that under Trump's DOJ, there has been resistance, there have been delays, there has been a narrowing of what will be made public, there have been statements downplaying the existence of certain materials, and that is what fuels suspicion, not because Trump has been accused in court testimony, but because the administration appears to be controlling information flow. Now, let's be careful here. Controlling disclosure does not automatically prove guilt. But it does raise questions. And in a case like this, secrecy is poison. Because secrecy is exactly what allowed Epstein to thrive for decades. Epstein survived because institutions looked away. Because prosecutors cut deals. Because wealthy circles protected themselves. Because victims were silenced. So when the public sees secrecy again, the reaction is immediate. Not this again. And survivors have made that crystal clear. Survivors have said that delays and redactions are not just frustrating, they are re-traumatizing. Because every day the full truth stays hidden feels like the system is still choosing power over justice. And that is why victims and advocates are demanding independent oversight. That is why some have called for special review mechanisms. That is why court pressure is mounting, not to create political theater, but to force compliance. Now, another important point. A lot of what people call the Epstein list is misunderstood. There is no single confirmed public document titled client list. What exists are flight logs, contact lists, deposition transcripts, investigative memos, sealed exhibits, and witness statements. Some names appear because they interacted socially. Some names appear because they traveled. Some names appear because they were investigated, and the presence of a name does not automatically equal criminal involvement. That's the uncomfortable truth. Which is why responsible reporting matters. Because if we throw every name into the same bucket, we destroy credibility. The public deserves accuracy. Survivors deserve seriousness. And accountability requires evidence, not assumption. That is why misinformation hurts this cause. When viral creators scream bombshell accusation without proof, it doesn't help survivors. It undermines them. It turns justice into content. And that is exactly how you lose trust. So what should we focus on instead? We should focus on the real questions. What documents remain sealed? Why? Who is fighting to keep them sealed? Who benefits? What materials exist that the public still hasn't seen? And why does transparency always seem to stop right at the edge of elite exposure? Those are the real questions. And that's why critics say this is not just about Epstein. It's about institutional integrity. Can the justice system withstand pressure when billionaires and politicians are in the orbit? Or will it do what it has always done? Protect the powerful. That's the test. Now, it is also true that Trump has fought disclosure in multiple areas, not just Epstein-related matters. The administration has battled over reports, investigations, and records that could be politically damaging. Critics see a pattern: control the narrative, seal the files, delay the releases, attack the media, claim persecution, and hope the public moves on. Whether that strategy is about protecting Trump personally or simply about political survival, it still feeds distrust. And distrust is deadly in cases involving trafficking and systemic abuse, because survivors have lived through a world where nobody believed them, where institutions dismissed them, where powerful people were untouchable. So the demand now is simple: enough secrecy, enough games, enough partial releases. If the government has the records, release them, and let accountability land wherever it lands, because justice is not partisan. If Democrats fall, they fall. If Republicans fall, they fall. If billionaires fall, they fall. That is what true accountability looks like. And that is why this issue is so volatile, because everyone senses what is underneath. If the full truth ever emerges, it could implicate more than anyone wants to admit. And that brings us back to the central point. The viral headline, "Trump blocks Epstein testimony," is not accurate. But the real story is still serious. A battle over transparency is happening right now. Survivors are demanding more disclosure. Lawmakers are pressuring the DOJ. The administration is resisting or narrowing releases. And the public does not trust institutions that have failed before. That is where we are. So now we arrive at the most important part of this entire story. Because once you strip away the viral lies, once you remove the fake courtroom scenes, once you stop treating Epstein as clickbait, you are left with one unavoidable question: what happens now? What does accountability actually look like? And how do we make sure the truth doesn't get buried again? Because here is the reality. The Epstein case is not just about one predator. It is about a system that allowed abuse to continue for years, a system that protected wealth, a system that traded silence for power. And the most dangerous thing that could happen right now is this: that the public becomes so overwhelmed by misinformation that they stop caring about the real facts. Because when the truth gets mixed with fiction, the powerful always win. That is how this works. And that is why media literacy is not some academic concept anymore. It is survival. The public is watching a real battle unfold. Survivors demanding transparency. Lawmakers demanding disclosure. Courts weighing legal limits. And an administration trying to control the narrative. That is the real story, not the fantasy version. And if we actually care about justice, we have to stay disciplined. Because accountability does not come from viral rage. It comes from evidence. It comes from institutions being forced to act. It comes from pressure that is grounded in reality. So let's talk about what accountability would actually require. First, full disclosure of all legally releasable Epstein-related materials. That does not mean reckless dumping of survivor identities. That does not mean endangering victims. But it does mean this. If the government has records about co-conspirators, if the government has documentation of networks, if the government has evidence involving powerful individuals, then secrecy cannot be the default. The public has the right to know what was covered up. Survivors have the right to know who enabled their trauma. And justice requires light, not darkness. Second, independent oversight. Because one of the deepest wounds of the Epstein case is that people don't trust the institutions anymore. They don't trust prosecutors. They don't trust elite law enforcement. They don't trust that the rich are treated the same as everyone else. And when trust collapses, the only solution is transparency with oversight. That is why survivors and advocates have pushed for independent review structures, special masters, court monitoring, external accountability mechanisms, not to create chaos, but to restore legitimacy. Because legitimacy is what was stolen from victims for decades. Third, a serious distinction between association and accusation. This is uncomfortable, but it matters. Epstein moved in wealthy circles. His contact list is enormous. His connections span decades. Some people interacted socially. Some people were unaware. Some people may have been complicit. Some may have been criminal. But the presence of a name is not proof, and the demand for accountability must be evidence-driven. Otherwise, the entire effort collapses. Because once you accuse without proof, you create the perfect defense. They point to exaggeration and say, "See, it's all fake." And then the real criminals hide behind the noise. So the standard must remain. Evidence first, always. Fourth, stop turning survivor trauma into content. This is something the internet has failed at repeatedly. Epstein is not entertainment. Trafficking is not a political weapon. These survivors are not characters in someone's outrage economy. They are human beings. And every time the story is twisted for clicks, every time people invent accusations, every time they exaggerate legal events that never happened, survivors pay the price. Because truth matters most when the stakes are human lives. And fifth, accountability must be nonpartisan, or it will fail. Epstein was not partisan. Abuse was not partisan. Trafficking was not partisan. Power protects itself across ideological lines, and real justice demands something uncomfortable. If evidence implicates Democrats, they must face consequences. If evidence implicates Republicans, they must face consequences. If evidence implicates billionaires, they must face consequences. If evidence implicates foreign elites, they must face consequences. That is what equal justice means. Otherwise, it is theater. And survivors have already had enough theater. Now let's return to the Trump-specific issue. Trump's name appears in Epstein-related documents as an associate. He knew Epstein. That is confirmed. He socialized with him. That is confirmed. He made comments about Epstein that raised eyebrows. That is confirmed. Those facts deserve scrutiny, and the administration's resistance to transparency raises legitimate concern. But that concern must remain factual. The unsealed documents do not accuse Trump of sexual assault. That is also confirmed. So the real conversation is not, Trump blocks victim testimony naming him directly. That claim is not supported. The real conversation is, why are documents being controlled? Why are releases delayed? Why do survivors feel ignored? Why does secrecy persist? Those are the questions that matter. And those are the questions that still require answers. Because in the end, this isn't just about Trump. It's about whether the United States can still do the most basic thing any democracy must do: apply the law equally, expose abuse regardless of status, and protect victims rather than reputations. That is the test, and it is not over. More documents may come, more court fights may happen, more names may surface. And in every moment, the public will face a choice. Do we follow verified facts, Or do we chase viral fantasy because fantasy creates outrage? But facts create pressure. Outrage fades, pressure lasts. So here is the takeaway. If you want justice in the Epstein case, reject misinformation, demand real transparency, support survivor voices, hold institutions accountable, and keep the focus on what can be proven, not what can be dramatized. Because accountability is not built on rumors, it is built on records. And the truth does not need exaggeration. The truth is already enough. If powerful people were protected, expose that protection. If documents are being withheld, demand disclosure. If survivors are being re-traumatized, listen to them. And if the system is once again choosing secrecy over justice, then the pressure must remain until it breaks. That is how accountability works. Not through fiction, but through fact. And that is what is actually happening right now. Not a made-up courtroom scene, but a real fight over whether the truth will be fully revealed. The world is watching, survivors are waiting, and history will remember who chose transparency and who chose silence.